Data shows that sexual violence is extremely prevalent at Canada's 2 Royal Military Colleges. Group criticizes new policy that allows the government to pull items off the shelf if they are being used dangerously off-label. BMO makes slightly less profit in the first quarter than they did in Q1 2023. Sierra Leone is struggling with a drug crisis, and Lula has recalled Brazil's ambassador from Israel. Good morning. It's Thursday, May 30th. I'm Nora, coming to you live and direct from the encampment at the University of Toronto. Here are your headlines. Before I start, you should know that you're going to hear birds chirping, you might hear people laughing, you might hear people talking, I might make a few more mistakes. I am literally sitting under a tree at the encampment at the University of Toronto. I can see dozens of tents, and I am facing Convocation Hall and the CN Tower, in case you're familiar a little bit with the area. It is so beautiful. The grass is green, people are running around. I see one child skipping past far away from me, and it just looks like an idyllic summer day, to be honest. It's a beautiful show of steadfast solidarity with the people of Gaza, and I hope that you have the opportunity to check it out at some point. First, we start with new data that shows that 5% of women at Canadian military colleges have reported being sexually attacked in the past year. The attacks range from being held down to hurt or forced into unwanted sexual acts. Ashley Burke from CBC News reports that the data was gathered for a survey that also said that 9% of the respondents said that they had been sexually assaulted while drugged, intoxicated, or manipulated in some way. That was 9% of respondents had that experience in just the previous year. And most women surveyed, but also an overwhelming majority of men too, reported that they had experienced unwanted sexual behavior of some kind the previous year. The Canadian Defence Academy calls the data, quote-unquote, completely unacceptable. The survey asked students about sexual assault at the Royal Military College branches in Kingston and Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu. It's the first time that a survey like that has ever been done. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said that the culture at RMC needs to change. The trouble, of course, is that it's the military. Taking sexual violence out of the military is like taking the violence out of the military. Pretty hard to still have a military left over. Next, the Liberals created new powers in the last budget to be able to remove products off store shelves if it's found that they are causing harm to people by being used in a way that the product isn't intended to be used. The Minister of Health would be allowed to put conditions on the sale, advertising, manufacture, or importation of certain goods if they are being used off-label in a way that caused harm. The only example of this in the article is listed as being nicotine patches because they've been marketed to young people and shouldn't have been. The concerns about this new power has been raised by a group called the Consumer Choice Centre, a group that the Canadian Press says has received some money from the tobacco industry, who warns that the rules could be used in the case of contraceptives. Now, they don't say anything else about the Consumer Choice Centre, what they support or what they advocate for, or who they are, or who their leadership is, really basic details not included in this article. Now, contraceptives, it's probably not the strongest argument because while contraceptives are sometimes used off-label to help people with hormonal issues, the immediate thing I think of are the abortion pills. Those used to be used off-label to trigger abortions and still are in countries where abortion is illegal. Here is Health Minister Mark Holland's defense. Quote, there are enough rules in place that a minister would have to be completely dishonest to be able to use the new powers in that way, unquote. The article in the Canadian Press, as it appears at CTV News, doesn't tell us if Holland is right in asserting that or not, so we're left with not really knowing. Next, some good news from the banking system. The Bank of Montreal's American businesses saw its net profits fall by 24%. This is right after the bank acquired the Bank of the West in a $16.3 billion deal. Nivedita Valu and Arasu Kanaji Basil from Reuters report that Canadian banks, who, by the way, are on track to make $60 billion in profit in 2024, which is something the article doesn't mention, are looking to make money in the US because they are looking for, quote, alternative paths for growth as competition intensifies in a saturated market at home in a highly regulated market, unquote. That is journalism speak saying that Canada's market has too many players, which, reminder, it's just 5, and that the market is too regulated for the banks to find new and innovative ways to take even more money from us. But it takes quite a while in the article before you get to the part that says that in Canada, the Bank of Montreal has had a 23% rise in their profits. They quote an analyst who says that it's been, quote, a tough quarter for BMO, unquote, despite a 25% rise in their profits. Overall, BMO, quote unquote, only made $2.03 billion in the first quarter alone. That was down from $2.19 billion that they made in 2023. Now to international news, and first to Sierra Leone, where that country is dealing with the ravages of a new drug crisis. The drug that's driving the crisis is Kush, which is a mixture of cannabis with fentanyl or tramadol and formaldehyde. The Associated Press has done a feature on the extreme measures that a clandestine treatment program has been using to try and get people clean. The tactics are abusive, and the program is fully run by volunteers. Habib Tagore Kamara likens the addiction crisis to COVID and Ebola, two other epidemics that Sierra Leone has had to struggle through. The article doesn't explain the economic conditions that are driving the addictions crisis or what the negative impacts have been of that country's leadership deciding to use a tough-on-drugs approach to helping people. With a health system that is incapable of meeting the needs that exist, the feature leaves out a lot from the narrative, but there are photos and perhaps you'd be interested to check it out. It's from the Associated Press. And finally, Brazil's president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, has pulled Brazil's ambassador from Israel. When Lula compared Israel's campaign against Gaza to the Holocaust, their ambassador was recalled to the National Holocaust Museum in West Jerusalem by Israel Katz. Al Jazeera reports that this was done to publicly reprimand him. And now, Brazil has asked for their ambassador to leave Israel and instead work in Geneva with another United Nations mission for Brazil. Earlier this week, Norway, Spain, and Ireland formally recognized the state of Palestine, and Israel has continued its attacks against Rafah. Those are your headlines for Thursday, May 30th. I'm Nora. I'm so happy that I figured out a way to do this. I don't know what it's going to sound like. So what you're listening to is the best that I could do in terms of editing, considering that I am outside under a tree that's full of birds. I hope there's a lot of chirping in this tape. I don't get home until midnight tonight, and so I considered maybe not even doing this episode at all, but with some time, a beautiful chair that's been lent to me by this encampment, and the wonderful spirit of being here, I thought, yeah, I can do this. So this is the podcast coming live to you from the encampment at the University of Toronto in Toronto, Ontario. Thank you for listening, as always, and make sure you show your solidarity to local Palestinian activism that is happening wherever you are. You are listening to this podcast at sandyandnora.com, on the Real News Network podcast feed, and anywhere you get your podcasts. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.